Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of silk togas, flickering oil lamps, and dinner tables covered in peacock feathers and pomegranate seeds. You're not just visiting ancient Rome, you're a guest at one of its most extravagant feasts. And yes, someone's in the kitchen right now trying to extract the brain from a bird that's taller than your uncle. You step out of your sandals and into a mosaic-floored atrium that smells like beeswax and slightly overcooked lentils. A slave quietly takes your cloak, though it's not exactly cold, and you hear a distant squawk, because dinner tonight is a show. The host has pulled out all the stops. His status depends on it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. I love seeing the map light up every night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a domus owned by a senator named Lucius Septimius, a man whose sandals probably cost more than your rent. He's throwing a cena, a formal dinner, and the buzz of anticipation is thicker than the honeyed wine. As you follow the soft-footed servant through a side hallway, the scent of spiced meat and roasting figs tickles your nose. But then, wait, is that a bird? A very large bird? In the courtyard, caged under an awning, stands an actual ostrich. Tall, irritable, and very much alive. You make awkward eye contact with it, unsure who feels more out of place. This is no zoo. This is dinner prep. See, Romans loved a culinary flex. They weren't just feeding guests. They were performing status, wealth, and cultured absurdity. Dishes had to shock, amuse, or bewilder. Flamingo tongues? Yes. Dormice rolled in poppy seeds? Naturally. Ostrich brain. That's the evening's conversation starter. In the kitchen, a smoky, frantic realm ruled by cooks more stressed than any Michelin chef. You spot the main act being prepared. A young assistant is gently patting down the ostrich's neck, murmuring to calm it, though the bird looks deeply unimpressed. Its fate is sealed. You duck your head through the kitchen's stone archway and watch as the cook, sweat beading down his temples, examines a rolled-up scroll tucked near the hearth. It's a recipe from the legendary Apicius, Rome's most famous gourmet and probable food lunatic. The instructions are terrifyingly casual. Take the brain of an ostrich. Season with pepper, lovage, and a little vinegar. Boil. Serve warm. You probably won't survive this. Someone brings in a pot of imported saffron, its threads worth more than gold. A slave grinds it down with dried rose petals, because what's an ostrich brain without a floral finish? The kitchen is chaos. A second bird, roasted and stuffed with fish, sits on a silver platter nearby. A small fire breaks out under the lentil pot, but no one cares. It's all about the brain. There's a certain reverence to the moment when it's removed. The assistant steps aside. The cook takes his blade. Silence, except for the bird's soft rustle of feathers. Then, just like that, it's done. This might sound like a medieval fever dream, but Romans really did this. They sourced ostriches from Africa, paraded them at games, and occasionally turned them into dinner. Pliny the Elder, our favorite overenthusiastic naturalist, even wrote about their size and speed. But were ostrich brains common? Absolutely not. They were rare, which made them valuable. And that, of course, made them perfect for the elite table. Historians still argue whether it was the taste or the rarity that mattered more, but the answer is probably both. You glance back at the brain. It's now soaking in a shallow dish of honeyed vinegar. Someone sprinkles pepper with a flourish. Another servant tastes a drop and winces. Too much garum. always the garum. In a quiet moment, a kitchen boy leans in and whispers that last week's dinner featured eel stuffed with apricots and actual pearls. This is tame by comparison. And yet, there's something oddly elegant about the ritual. The careful preparation. The way the cook arranges the plate with fresh mint and a tiny carved carrot in the shape of a laurel wreath. The presentation will matter just as much as the flavor, if not more. Eventually, you're ushered into the triclinium, the Roman dining room where you don't sit, you recline. Cushions are fluffed. A slave ladles watered wine. The ostrich brain, warm and ready, is waiting just off stage. It will appear in the third course, right after the stuffed dormice but before the pine nut custard. For now, you settle in, pretending you totally belong here. You barely have time to shift into your assigned lounging position, left elbow propped, sandals discreetly kicked aside, when the first dishes begin parading in. Sizzling pork sausages laced with figs, a salad of bitter greens and pickled lotus root, and a plate of mysterious wobbly eggs that may or may not have come from a flamingo. But your eyes keep drifting to the sideboard. That's where the star attraction, the ostrich brain, is waiting. The plate it rests on is an elaborate mosaic of silver and enamel, depicting Romulus and Remus suckling a rather confused-looking she-wolf. Appropriate, somehow. You can almost feel the heat radiating from the delicately poached brain as it sits in its golden puddle of vinegar, pepper, and sweetened wine. It doesn't exactly smell bad, it's just unfamiliar, earthy, slightly metallic, like warm walnuts mixed with wet parchment. The host, Lucius Septimius, is watching you from his place of honor with the faintest smirk. He knows. He knows you're new to this, maybe a visiting provincial or a friend of a friend from the provinces. And he's loving it. That's the point of a dinner like this. To impress, to confuse, to dominate the social pecking order with edible theater. When the server finally brings the brain to the table, it comes garnished with violets and a little plume of smoke from a tiny charcoal brazier underneath. Lucius claps his hands once, dramatically. Avis Africanus cerebrum, he says with relish. Fit for Caesar, yet served to you. No pressure. The taste, it's soft, creamy, like warm herbed custard if it had been spooned out of a leather shoe. There's a lingering tang from the vinegar, and a peppery burn in the back of your throat. It isn't bad exactly, but it's not the kind of thing you wake up craving. Across the table, a senator named Flavius is whispering about how last week's dinner at Marcus Terentius's villa involved parrot tongues and caramelized locusts. He sounds bitter, like someone trying to one-up a neighbor who just got a newer chariot. You begin to realize, ostrich brain isn't just food, it's a weapon. Because in Roman society, the dinner party is everything. It's where reputations rise, alliances form, and enemies are silently insulted by seating placement. You might think you're here for the flavors, but what's really being served is power, with a side of organ meat. An ostrich brain. That's pure elite cuisine. A delicacy that screams, I have connections. These birds didn't exactly roam the streets of Rome. They were imported from North Africa, often via Egypt, through a complex network of traders, hunters, and handlers. Getting one required favors, wealth, and patience, since they didn't always survive the trip. Historians still argue whether ostriches were raised in semi-captivity or simply captured wild. Evidence is spotty. Mosaics show them in cages, but few archaeological remains survive. What is clear, once they arrived, they were paraded through the streets, brought to amphitheaters for spectacle, or, if they were lucky, served with saffron sauce. It's not even the first time you've seen one today. This afternoon, while walking near the forum, you caught a glimpse of a procession featuring exotic animals. A camel with bells, a panther on a leash, and at the very end, an ostrich, its feathers ruffled, clearly unimpressed by Roman fanfare. Lucius leans in now, watching you finish your brain bite with polite determination. Most people can't get past the texture, he says. But it's the vinegar that unlocks the flavor. You nod as if you agree. You don't. But you admire the confidence. In a society that valued convivium, the act of dining together, as both cultural ritual and social chess, having an ostrich brain on the menu was like showing up to a potluck with a Fabergé. It wasn't just rare. It was ridiculous. And that was the point. The absurdity was part of the charm. You sip your watered wine. A slave nearby refills your cup before it even dips below halfway. Someone starts reciting a few lines of Ovid. Another guest loudly misquotes Virgil, and a polite argument ensues. In the background, the kitchen doors swing open again. The next course is approaching. But before it does, Lucius taps his goblet and announces that the brain dish has historical precedent. Mark Antony once tried to impress Cleopatra, he claims, by serving 6 different animal brains, one from each continent. Is that true? Well, historians still argue whether that ever happened. But does it matter? In this room, it feels true. And in Roman society, perception is half the feast. Your stomach isn't sure what it thinks yet. A little too much garum on the previous course, and the wine is sweet enough to qualify as syrup. But you lean back against your cushion and smile faintly. You've survived the ostrich brain. One guest, clearly a little tipsy, raises his spoon and says, "You know, ostriches swallow stones to digest their food. Imagine what their brains think of us eating them." Laughter circles the room, slow and lazy like the rising smoke from the oil lamps. You glance down at the plate again. Just a few decorative petals remain. The brain has vanished, along with your hesitation. Welcome to Rome. Now that you've made it through the ceremonial bite, and maybe even pretended to savor it, you settle into the rhythm of the feast. Romans never rushed dinner. A proper cena unfolded like theater. Slow, dramatic, and meant to impress at every act. The next course arrives. A dish of sea urchin roe garnished with fresh thyme and what looks suspiciously like jellyfish skin. The servant offers it with a bow, careful not to drip any brine on the host's imported linen tablecloth, which is embroidered with scenes from the Iliad. Naturally, your fingers are already oily from the candied pine nuts, and your lips tingling from whatever strange pepper oil was laced through the last course. And while you're trying to calculate whether the fish you just tasted was raw, fermented, or both, Lucius decides it's story time. He leans forward, eyes twinkling with a mischievous glint, and launches into a tale about Emperor Elagabalus, Rome's most delightfully unhinged party boy. According to Lucius, Elagabalus once threw a dinner where the guests were served peacock brains, nightingale tongues, and, yes, ostrich brains soaked in gold-infused oil. The table hums with amusement. You know Elagabalus has a reputation for excess, but this story veers into legend. Historians still argue whether such feasts truly happened or whether Roman gossip just got really creative after 3 cups of Mulsum. But in this room, with the scent of roasted caraway and grilled figs in the air, the tale fits the mood too perfectly to doubt. Someone asks, but why brains? Lucius lifts a single manicured brow. Because liver is passé. And while that earns a ripple of laughter, the real answer lies somewhere between symbolism and spectacle. In Roman thought, the brain wasn't yet revered as the seat of reason. That was still the heart's domain. But the brain, squishy, rare, and tucked away inside the body's command center, represented hidden refinement. A delicacy for those who'd already eaten everything else. You sip your drink and glance at a fresco on the far wall. Dionysus reclining with a cup, surrounded by drunken satyrs. Someone's drawn a small smile on one of the satyrs with charcoal. Probably the host's son. You appreciate the quiet chaos of it. Across the room, a guest recounts a recipe allegedly favored by Apicius himself. Stuffed sow's womb, fried and glazed with honey. But only if it's from a sow that's recently given birth, the guest adds. The texture is better. You nod like that's the most natural sentence you've ever heard. Because here, you have to keep pace. And speaking of Apicius, his influence looms large tonight. That cookbook, De Re Coquinaria, is the Roman gourmand's Bible. Half recipe collection, half fever dream, it lists dozens of dishes designed for diners who thought boiled ostrich brain needed an upgrade. One of its recipes recommends blending brains into a custard with roux and date syrup. Another advises frying them in olive oil until crispy. Why? Because once you've conquered empire, you get bored. And Roman cuisine, especially among the wealthy, evolved into an arms race of absurdity. Historians still debate whether these recipes were ever widely made, or whether they served more as aspirational food porn. After all, few could afford an ostrich, let alone know how to extract its brain without ruining dinner, or your toga. But among the elite, showing off was survival. You were what you served. And serving brains. That was a clear signal. You had reach. You had chefs trained in Africa or Syria. You had ingredients from the Nile to the industry. And you had guests willing to eat what others wouldn't even touch. It wasn't all pretentious posturing, though. There was genuine culinary curiosity. Romans loved experimenting with texture. Soft, chewy, crunchy, and flavor, sweet, sour, umami, fermented. Ostrich brain ticked several of those boxes, especially when paired with garum and a dab of honey. By now, your own brain feels slightly marinated. You've eaten an alarming number of things you didn't recognize, and you're starting to enjoy the dreamy, wine-blurred way time drips through these courses. There's music now, plucked lyres and a faint flute, and the scent of frankincense curling lazily from a brazier. Your stomach growls again, not from hunger, but from mild rebellion. You whisper a prayer to Mercury, god of travelers and those who ingest unfamiliar proteins. Just then, a servant walks by holding what appears to be an edible mosaic. Pressed duck slices arranged to look like a hunting scene, complete with a tiny olive for the hunter's eye. It's almost too detailed to eat. Almost. Lucius claps again, once more for emphasis, and says, "Now, who's ready for the eel stuffed with cherries?" You are not. But you smile anyway. Somewhere in the blur of laughter and the rustle of tunics, you think about that ostrich again. The way it looked at you. As if it knew you'd end up tasting a part of its brain, even if you didn't ask for it. And you wonder, quietly, what future generations will think of this night. The night deepens, and the conversation at the table drifts into tales of exotic trade routes and the strange goods that flow along them. Lucius, never one to miss a chance to dazzle, begins describing the intricate journey an ostrich might take before becoming tonight's centerpiece. You picture the vast deserts of North Africa, where ostriches roam wild beneath a sun so fierce it seems to melt the horizon. Traders, sometimes Arab, sometimes Berber, track these enormous birds with practiced ease, using nets, patience, and a bit of luck to capture them. Their feathers, prized for decoration and ritual, fetch a good price. But the birds themselves, alive or freshly slaughtered, are rarer commodities. From there, the ostrich must be shipped along the legendary silk routes, across treacherous deserts and winding rivers, bound ultimately for Mediterranean ports. At each stop, merchants haggle over its value like it was a rare gem instead of a giant bird with a brain the size of a fist. Roman nobles like Lucius have to depend on this complicated web of trade to get their delicacies. The ostrich brain scarcity is part of its charm. After all, a bird that eats stones to aid digestion isn't exactly easy to farm. No one's quite sure if Romans tried, or if they just relied on the wild ones brought in from the edges of the known world. Historians still argue whether there was any large-scale ostrich domestication in antiquity. You think back to the dinner earlier, recalling how the brain was served in a small pool of vinegar and wine. That was no accident. The Romans understood preservation and flavoring well. Garum, a fermented fish sauce that could make even the blandest meal intriguing, was a staple. Its sharpness balanced richer ingredients, and vinegar helped tame the sometimes overpowering earthiness of organ meats. As you lean back, you hear murmurs about the silk routes themselves, ancient highways of commerce and culture, stretching from China to Rome. Not just silk, but spices, perfumes, and exotic foods flowed along these paths. Ostrich brains, being such a rare commodity, were a symbol of the far-flung reach of Roman power and taste. Nearby, a slave quietly fans a guest, while another adjusts the oil lamps, casting flickering shadows over carved wooden panels depicting hunters and their quarry. The ambience is cozy, yet charged with subtle prestige. Lucius goes on to mention that ostriches held symbolic meaning, too. The bird represented speed and agility, and their feathers were often used to decorate ceremonial helmets and to signal status. The ostrich's ability to survive in harsh deserts made it a metaphor for endurance, something the Romans admired. You notice a guest fiddling with an ostrich feather fan, smoothing it carefully. It seems almost reverent, like holding a piece of distant wilderness right in the middle of a marble-clad villa. Back on the plate, the brain's texture remains a talking point. Some say it was prized because of its softness, others because it was a novelty, a conversation starter. The contrast between the silky brain and the sharpness of vinegar mirrored the contradictions of Rome itself, refined yet wild, luxurious yet brutal. The debate about whether ostrich brains were regularly eaten by Romans or reserved for special occasions continues among scholars. Some believe the elite used such dishes for display rather than nourishment, while others argue these delicacies formed an essential part of the culinary landscape. You sip your wine again, letting the conversation swirl around you as much as the aromas. Somewhere outside, the faint call of a night bird drifts through the windows, mixing with the muted chatter inside. The ostrich, you think, may be far from home. But here, in this room filled with laughter, smoke, and slow-burning oil lamps, it has found a new stage. The feast continues its unhurried rhythm, and the table's chatter shifts toward the less savory, yet oddly fascinating topic of Roman medicine and dining, because nothing complements a delicate ostrich brain dish like a discussion of ancient health remedies. You find yourself listening as a guest recounts how Roman doctors sometimes recommended ostrich brain as a cure-all for various ailments. It was believed to sharpen the mind, calm nerves, and even ease insomnia. The irony, of course, is delicious. A dish so rich and unusual was said to soothe restless minds. Maybe that's why it was popular at late-night dinners like this one. Roman medical texts often mix practical advice with superstition. They advised specific diets, bathing rituals, and even prayers to the gods of healing. One healer famously suggested that eating ostrich brains could help women recover from childbirth, a claim historians still debate. Was it a metaphorical healing or actual nutritional benefit? Either way, it shows how intertwined food and health were in Roman culture. Your mind drifts to the aromas wafting around you: rosemary, cumin, and faint traces of smoked fish. The smells mingle and settle into your memory like a softly played tune. You realize how much these sensory details shape your experience, making the ancient world feel tactile and alive. Between bites, a scholar at the table quietly challenges the lore, noting that some recipes using ostrich brains might have been exaggerated or symbolic rather than commonly prepared meals. This debate mirrors a larger question. Did the Roman elite truly eat these extravagant dishes regularly, or were they culinary theater, more performance than practice? You take a small, deliberate bite of a honey-glazed quail, feeling the contrast of sweet and savory settle on your tongue. It's comforting in a way that makes you almost forget you're dining centuries in the past. Almost. Suddenly, a servant passes by with a small dish of spiced dormice, a delicacy you remember reading about but have never tried. The tiny creatures are stuffed with minced pork and pine nuts, seasoned carefully, and roasted to a golden crisp. You stare at it, wondering if this is the moment you cross a culinary boundary or just a historical spectator. Lucius chuckles, noticing your hesitation. "Only the bravest try the dormice," he says, as if you're about to volunteer for gladiatorial combat instead of nibbling a rodent. You smile politely and shift your attention back to the brain dish, which has been replenished with a drizzle of fragrant oil and a sprinkle of crushed peppercorns. The taste is subtle but layered, like a story unfolding slowly on your palate. Outside, the villa's gardens rustle softly in the night breeze, the scent of jasmine curling through the open windows. It's a gentle reminder that this feast is part of a larger world, one full of hidden meanings, forgotten rituals, and the curious human need to transform the ordinary into something memorable. Historians still argue whether the Roman elite's fascination with exotic foods was driven more by genuine appreciation or social signaling. Maybe it was both. As you lean back in your chair, the weight of the night settles comfortably on you. The flicker of candlelight casts long shadows, and somewhere a lyre's soft notes drift upward, lulling the gathering toward quieter moments. Your thoughts circle back to the ostrich brain, that peculiar delicacy, and you wonder what part of it, flavor, rarity, or symbolism, held the greatest allure for those long-ago Romans. The evening's pace slows further, and the conversation drifts to the rituals surrounding Roman dining, because, as you might guess, a meal was never just about food. It was a carefully choreographed performance, a dance of gestures, words, and meanings. You notice how each guest handles their utensils, or rather, the absence of modern utensils. Romans typically ate with their hands, using pieces of bread as both vehicle and utensil, wiping sauces or scooping morsels. The lack of forks encourages a slow, deliberate eating style, which suits the mellow mood of this night. Lucius explains how Roman hosts took pride in the order of courses. The ostrich brain, served early, was considered a delicate starter, signaling sophistication. The order was as much about pacing the evening as it was about digestion. Too fast, and the body rebelled. Too slow, and guests grew bored. Balance was key. You catch the faint scent of myrrh burning nearby, a fragrance known for its calming properties and often used to prepare the senses for sleep. It mingles with the lingering smell of roasted meats and fresh herbs, creating an atmosphere almost designed to coax tired minds toward restfulness. As you chew slowly, a curious detail comes up. Ostrich brains were sometimes served with a side of silphium, a now extinct plant prized in Roman cooking for its pungent flavor and medicinal properties. Silphium was so valuable it was depicted on coins, and losing it is one of history's botanical mysteries. Historians still argue whether silphium's extinction was due to overharvesting or climate changes, but its legendary status remains. You can almost imagine how its sharp, resinous taste complemented the gentle richness of the ostrich brain, adding a zing that lingered on the tongue like a secret. A servant discreetly passes a small dish of garum sauce, fermented fish liquid that the Romans adored. Its potent smell might deter the uninitiated, but here, it's a revered condiment, boosting the umami notes of every bite. You watch as the guests dip their bread into the sauce, their faces relaxed, enjoying the slow unraveling of flavors. The contrast between the humble bread and the luxurious toppings mirrors Roman society itself, where public modesty masked private opulence. Lucius then shares a lesser-known fact. Some Romans believed that eating ostrich brain improved memory and wit, making it a favorite among scholars and politicians who needed every edge during debates in the forum. Whether this was placebo or culinary myth remains uncertain. You chuckle softly, imagining Cicero with a plate of ostrich brains tucked under one arm, ready to sharpen his rhetoric. The idea is both amusing and oddly comforting, ancient self-care, Roman style. As the meal winds down, the discussion turns to how food shaped Roman identity. Exotic ingredients like ostrich brains were badges of status, but they also connected Romans to faraway lands and cultures, reinforcing the empire's vastness. Outside, the night deepens, and a soft breeze rustles the olive trees. You feel the weight of history settling gently over the room, as if the ghosts of dinners past are leaning in, eager to share their stories. The candles burn lower now, casting golden pools of light that barely reach the corners of the room. The guests speak in murmurs, their voices softened by wine, full bellies, and the encroaching hush of midnight. And yet the conversation takes an unexpected turn. Someone brings up animal symbolism in Roman culture. Lucius, always happy to show off, raises his goblet and explains that the ostrich was more than a quirky entree. It was a creature steeped in symbolism, caught between admiration and absurdity. Romans saw it as a kind of natural paradox. A bird that can't fly but runs faster than a horse. A creature of the desert, yet absurdly oversized and, let's be honest, a little goofy looking. You imagine the moment. A soldier on campaign in Numidia glimpses a wild ostrich darting across the sand. Its feathers stream like banners behind it. It's impressive, yes, but also comical, especially when it hides its head, seemingly pretending the world can't see it. That detail, the classic image of ostriches burying their heads, is likely a myth, but Romans believed it wholeheartedly. To them, it symbolized willful ignorance. An ostrich on a mosaic or painted in a villa might have been a sly commentary, a reminder not to look away from life's dangers, or perhaps a subtle dig at someone in the household. One guest mentions that in some Roman artworks, ostriches appear beside conquered peoples, part exotic trophy, part visual brag. To serve the animal's brain at a feast, then, becomes both culinary flourish and imperial metaphor. It's not just a dish, it's a story about conquest, possession, and your place at the top of the pecking order. Historians still argue whether Romans believed these animal associations literally or used them more as metaphors. Some suggest the symbolism was deeply spiritual. Others think it was just decorative flair with no lasting theological weight. Back at the table, a guest gestures toward a carved panel on the wall, an ostrich mid-stride, surrounded by laurels. You suddenly notice how many visual cues are tied into this theme. Plumes on helmets, feathered fans in corners, even the stylized table legs shaped like bird talons. This isn't a one-off fascination. It's a motif. The Romans, you realize, loved patterns. They wove meaning into everything. Food, furniture, clothing, architecture. And just like the ostrich, they wanted to seem swift, strong, enduring. Maybe even a bit absurd in their ambitions. Lucius leans in to share a fringe theory. Some Romans believed the ostrich had magical properties. Not just medicinal, but almost talismanic. Carrying a bit of ostrich bone or feather was thought to guard against forgetfulness, or, oddly enough, to calm rebellious children. You glance toward the children's quarters and wonder if any ostrich feather talismans are pinned discreetly above their beds. Stranger things have been used in the name of peace and quiet. The room hums softly now, not just from conversation, but from a deeper undercurrent of reverence. You feel it in the rhythm of the evening, the slow unfolding of story, the layers of tradition, the curious way a single dish like ostrich brain can ripple through so many parts of Roman life. A nearby guest, half drowsy from wine and stewed dates, begins humming a lullaby. The melody is simple, repetitive, and haunting. You find yourself swaying slightly to its cadence, not quite conscious of the motion. And just like that, the ostrich, once a bird darting wildly across desert sands, now feels like part of your own quiet dreamscape. The table has thinned now. A few guests have slipped away into side rooms, lulled by wine and the late hour. You, however, remain rooted, still pulled along by the gentle current of the conversation, which, somehow, has landed on Roman digestion. Because after eating a brain, it only makes sense to talk about your guts. Lucius, ever the candid host, is now regaling the few remaining guests with the marvels of Roman digestive wisdom. "You are what you digest," he proclaims with a grin, lifting a fig-stuffed date to his lips. "Not what you eat, what you digest." It's more than just a witty saying. Romans were obsessed with digestion. Physicians like Galen wrote entire volumes on how to chew properly, how long to wait between courses, and what food soothed which organs. The ostrich brain, it turns out, was considered gentle on the stomach, soft, rich, and believed to be cooling in the balance of the humors. Humor theory ruled the day. You weren't just eating for taste, you were correcting imbalances in your body. If your bile was too black, or your blood too warm, the wrong dish could make you melancholic, or worse, imaginative. You eye a carafe of fennel-infused wine, which a servant pours liberally for anyone still awake. Fennel, Lucius explains, helps ease bloating. He winks as he nudges the wine toward a guest who had 3 helpings of stuffed dormice earlier. The Romans also had something of a ritual for postprandial rest. After banquets, guests were encouraged to recline, not just out of comfort, but because they believed digestion worked best while lying down. It's why so many dinner parties took place on couches in the first place. You shift slightly, feeling the plush cushion beneath you. It does make the whole process more relaxing, doesn't it? You wonder if reclining might actually help the ostrich brain go down easier. A fringe belief shared by Lucius catches your ear. Some swore that ostrich meat and organs digested so quickly, they could be consumed even during a fast without angering the gods. A curious loophole, if you ask the temple priests. Historians still argue whether the digestive rituals around banquets were based more on actual effects or pure placebo. Did people genuinely feel better reclining, or had they simply been told they should? The line between belief and biology blurs easily after a 4th cup of wine. As the hour grows later, talk softens into sleepy tangents, like how Emperor Vitellius allegedly consumed such vast quantities of exotic foods that his stomach required daily massages. Not exactly dinner party material, but somehow fitting in this context of excess and digestion. Lucius shares another tale. In some regions, ostriches were force-fed special herbs before slaughter, so their organs would be pre-seasoned from within. It sounds like a culinary legend, until you remember that this is the same civilization that turned fish guts into a prized condiment. The flames in the oil lamps gutter slightly, and shadows grow longer. You feel a yawn rise in your throat and let it come. Across from you, a guest has dozed off entirely, their hand resting in a small dish of candied hazelnuts. No one wakes them. In this drowsy moment, the room itself seems to be digesting the evening. Plates are cleared, pillows are fluffed, sandals are loosened. Everything slows. Even the chirping of night insects outside has settled into a lower, lazier rhythm. You recline just a bit deeper into your couch, your mind heavy with herbs, humors, and half-remembered stories. The ostrich brain has long since been cleared from your plate, but its symbolic weight lingers. As the last of the fig wine disappears, a gentle clinking echoes from the far side of the atrium. It's the sound of a slave carefully rearranging the drinking vessels, each cup a different size, each one etched with tiny jokes or puns in Latin. You squint at one and make out a crude engraving of a man chasing a chicken that's wearing sandals. Typical Roman humor. The guests who remain now drift from food to philosophy, as if full stomachs naturally unlock the mind. It's time, Lucius declares, for a symposium-style finale. You're not quite sure if he's being serious or just delightfully pretentious. But that's the thing. Romans adored the idea of Greek wisdom, even if they mispronounced half the names and rewrote most of the myths. One guest begins quoting Plato, while another interrupts with a bawdy poem from Catullus about cucumbers. Both are applauded. And somehow, amidst this sleepy intellectual hum, the topic circles back to animals. Specifically, the strange relationship Romans had with them. You're surprised to hear that the ostrich was not just eaten or painted, it was sometimes performed. Yes, in the great colosseums of Rome, ostriches were paraded before crowds. Some were trained, others simply chased around to amuse the masses. There are even accounts of gladiators tasked with hunting down herds of them using bows or spears, fighting birds instead of lions. A different kind of spectacle. You raise an eyebrow. What exactly is the point of fighting an ostrich? You wonder aloud. Lucius chuckles. Pride. And feathered boots. Apparently, the feathers were as valuable as the meat, used in fans, helmets, and costumes for priests. One emperor supposedly wore a cloak lined with ostrich down, claiming it made him dream more vividly. Historians still debate whether these claims were exaggerated. Were ostrich hunts really that common in arenas, or did later writers inflate the drama? Some say it was rare, others insist it was all part of Rome's relentless appetite for novelty. The conversation shifts again, this time toward the ethics of it all. One thoughtful guest remarks that ancient Romans lived in contradiction. They worshipped nature's wonders while consuming them without remorse. You look around at the lavish spread, the silver trays, the saffron-soaked dates, and it's hard to disagree. And yet, in a strange way, the Romans also preserved what they devoured. By elevating animals into symbolism, poetry, even culinary memory, they granted them a strange kind of immortality. The ostrich brain, absurd as it sounds, becomes a time capsule, its flavor tangled up in philosophy and fashion, appetite and empire. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment. The voices continue around you, but they begin to blur together, like a warm mist of syllables and laughter, drifting gently above the flickering lamps. Somewhere in the back of the room, someone plucks a soft note on a lyre. The sound is tender, almost apologetic, like it knows it's not the center of attention. It's just there to soothe, to slow the air. A servant places a light lavender-scented cloth across your forehead, cool, damp, and unexpectedly perfect. You didn't even ask. But Romans were masters of comfort once you had the means. Your mind wanders, to dessert birds in golden cages, to scrolls inked with ancient recipes, to philosophers with wine-stained robes who argued about the proper way to peel a fig. The ostrich, somewhere in this dreamy mental menagerie, flutters its enormous wings and jogs off into a sunset made of clay rooftops and dusty wind. The party, if it can still be called that, is now little more than scattered cushions and half-finished thoughts. You lie there, not quite awake, not quite asleep, absorbing the strange lullaby of a Roman night. The distant rustle of palms, the slow drip of water from a nearby fountain, and the whisper of someone explaining the digestive qualities of snails. Yes, snails. Because even after all this, there's still room for a few more delicacies in the conversation, if not the stomach. Lucius, clearly pleased with the evening's flow, launches into a discussion of Rome's other exotic culinary obsessions, and you quickly learn that ostrich brain was hardly the end of their gastronomic creativity. Flamingo tongues, jellyfish salads, dormice rolled in poppy seed honey crusts, even sea urchin custards were served with a flourish. You stifle a laugh. It's like someone took a dare from the gods and turned it into a tasting menu. And what ties these oddities together is more than their rarity, it's their texture. The Romans adored soft, yielding foods. To them, a dish that melted in your mouth was not only pleasurable but elite. Brains, naturally, fit this bill. Some believed that soft foods transmitted their essence more purely. A brain, after all, was the seat of intellect. Consuming it might, just might, confer a touch of cleverness. And when the brain belonged to something as odd and swift as an ostrich, well, maybe you'd gain a bit of speed too. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were widely held or merely aristocratic fads. Was there really a belief in brain-to-brain transfer through dinner, or was it just elite Romans being bored and trying to impress each other with wild menus? Fringe sources even suggest that some Roman nobles believed certain organs, if consumed in silence, would imbue the eater with hidden knowledge. It's unclear whether this knowledge ever arrived, but the silent chewing was apparently very dignified. At your elbow, a fellow guest dozes with a slice of melon in one hand. Someone has placed a sprig of rosemary in his hair, and no one's quite sure if it's symbolic or accidental. Either way, it's very Roman. You try to imagine what it must have been like to be a cook in this world, expected to turn giraffe liver or ostrich gizzard into poetry. The cocus, that's the Latin word, had to be not only skilled but endlessly adaptable. Some, like the famed Apicius, even wrote cookbooks filled with such delicacies. Recipes that still survive today, though they require ingredients most modern supermarkets don't carry. You remember hearing that Apicius once bankrupted himself trying to maintain the standard of cuisine he had become accustomed to. It's both tragic and oddly noble in a greasy, olive oil slick sort of way. The fountain continues to gurgle. It's shaped like a dolphin, of course, because Romans believed dolphins were lucky, especially if you were at sea. You're not, of course. You're just at sea mentally now, bobbing along the waves of rich conversation and heavy, delicious absurdity. Someone nearby murmurs about Roman aphrodisiacs, and you catch snippets: hyena marrow, crocodile heart, powdered pearl, each more unhinged than the last. But all were consumed with the hope of tapping into something more. More power, more pleasure, more permanence. That's the through line, really. Everything on this table, from the spiced nuts to the steaming ostrich skulls, is about becoming. You don't just eat to survive. You eat to transform. To become better, stranger, bolder, someone worth remembering. And maybe that's why ostrich brains earned a spot on the Roman menu. Not because they were common or easy to prepare, but because they stood out. They were rare, they were ridiculous, and they made people talk. Even now, centuries later, here you are, still talking about them. Outside, the night deepens, and the air grows cooler, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and burning pine. Inside, the chatter has dwindled to a soft murmur, punctuated by the occasional clink of a cup or the shuffle of a restless guest. You're beginning to feel the pull of rest yourself, but the stories aren't finished yet, not by a long shot. Lucius leans back, a satisfied smile curling his lips as he surveys the remnants of the feast. "You've heard much about the food," he says softly, "but what of the feasts themselves? What made these dinners Roman beyond the plates?" You listen as he speaks of convivia, the grand social occasions that were equal parts theater, politics, and bonding. Dinner parties were where alliances were forged, scandals whispered, and reputations polished like fine silverware. One quirky detail emerges. Some Romans had a peculiar tradition called the gusttatio, the appetizer course, where the host might serve Augustus. A small bite meant to whet the appetite, sometimes a tiny taste of something extravagant, like a sliver of ostrich brain, to signal prestige. It was less about nourishment and more about show. The complexity of the menu was a form of social currency. You picture the atmosphere. Oil lamps casting dancing shadows, slaves moving silently to refill cups, the quiet but constant clatter of conversation weaving through the room like a living tapestry. The conversation turns to the servants themselves, often overlooked figures but crucial to the whole spectacle. They not only prepared and served the dishes but orchestrated the entire evening's pace and mood, subtly steering conversations and calming rising tensions. It's said that some slaves became so adept they were almost invisible hosts, reading the room better than anyone else and ensuring that even the most boisterous senators left with a smile. Historians still debate the degree of agency these servants had. Were they mere puppets, or did they hold quiet power behind the scenes? You sipped the last dregs of wine, feeling the warmth spread like a soft blanket through your limbs. The soft clatter of feet on mosaic floors, the faint scent of myrtle and honey, the murmur of laughter turning tender, all these details wrap around you like a gentle embrace. Lucius recounts an unusual practice. Some hosts would send guests home with small gifts, a fig, a pinch of herbs, even a token ostrich feather, symbols meant to prolong the evening's goodwill and soften the hard edge of reality beyond the villa walls. As you lean into the softness of your cushion, the flickering lamplight begins to blur, and the sound of voices blends into a quiet hum. You feel somehow that this is what the Romans meant by convivium. Not just a meal, but a shared moment in time, a breathing pause where worlds converged over food, stories, and the slow unfolding of night. And now, perhaps, it's your turn to rest. The room dims further as conversations taper off, leaving a gentle hum punctuated by the occasional creak of wooden chairs or the distant ripple of water in a basin. You find yourself drifting, but Lucius's voice pulls you back, this time with a softer, almost conspiratorial tone. He begins recounting the peculiar role ostriches played beyond just dinner tables, how their exotic image permeated Roman art and culture. These birds weren't merely food, they were symbols of the far reaches of the empire, creatures from lands so distant they might as well be myth. Roman mosaics occasionally feature ostriches with feathers spread wide, a vivid splash of black and white among the earthly tones. Their legs, surprisingly muscular, were admired in statues and frescoes, and some wealthy Romans even commissioned exotic ostrich leather goods, prized for their unique texture. What's more, ostrich eggs were highly coveted, not only as decorations but sometimes painted with intricate scenes from mythology or daily life. Imagine a giant white egg, glossed and shining, resting in your home like a fragile trophy of distant worlds. Historians still argue about how often such eggs were actually used. Were they common collectibles among the elite, or rare treasures displayed only on the most special occasions? You almost chuckle imagining a Roman child surprised at seeing one of these huge eggs, wondering if the little human tried to hatch it, only to learn that it wouldn't crack like the smaller eggs back home. The image shifts as Lucius recalls an odd Roman belief. Ostriches were thought to swallow stones to help grind their food inside their stomachs, a fact known even to Pliny the Elder, the ancient naturalist. But beyond the practical, this was interpreted metaphorically. Ostriches were seen as creatures that swallowed hardship silently, much like how Romans prided themselves on enduring trials without complaint. You take in this quietly hopeful idea, an ancient allegory wrapped in feathers and grit. As the last embers glow low, Lucius returns to the kitchen's edge, where the coquille, the cooks, clean the remnants of the feast. You can almost hear the rhythmic chopping of knives, the clatter of pots being stacked, and the faint aroma of herbs lingering stubbornly in the air. The juxtaposition of lavish parties and the hard work behind them feels particularly human. Behind every silk-draped guest was a slave who had spent hours preparing dishes as bizarre and sumptuous as ostrich brains. Your eyelids grow heavy as you recall the many layers of Roman life. The imperial grandeur, the philosophical debates, the culinary extravagance, and the quiet toil that made it all possible. And with that thought, the night's mosaic, intricate, colorful, and unpredictable, begins to dissolve softly into the calm darkness of sleep. The hush deepens as you slip further toward sleep, yet Lucius's voice remains a comforting thread, weaving the final stories into the fabric of the night. He now turns to a curious intersection between Roman medicine and their lavish feasts, revealing a side of these dinners you hadn't quite expected. In ancient Rome, food was not just sustenance or status, it was medicine. The idea of dietetics, the art of balancing foods to maintain health, was well established. Doctors prescribed meals carefully, believing that what you ate influenced your body's humors and spirits. Ostrich brains, surprisingly, appeared in some medicinal recipes, believed to soothe headaches and improve mental clarity. Whether this was due to their rich fat content or simply the allure of exotic ingredients remains debated among historians. One amusing tidbit emerges. Some Roman physicians suggested that eating ostrich brains could help you dream more vividly, a claim you're tempted to test once this story ends and sleep finally claims you. You imagine a Roman patient, frustrated by insomnia, being handed a small bowl of creamy, slightly mysterious brain mousse by a doctor in a white toga. "Try this," the physician would say, "and see what visions the night brings." Historians still argue whether these dietary prescriptions were truly effective or more placebo, comfort food for the wealthy, served with a side of hopeful optimism. Alongside medicinal uses, food also marked social rituals. Guests might be given particular dishes to signify their place in the hierarchy or to encourage certain behaviors, like generosity or loyalty. The culinary equivalent of a subtle nudge. You think about how different the stakes are in your modern snacks, mostly aimed at convenience or instant pleasure, rather than social signaling or health balance. As Lucius's voice mellows, you sense the night's rhythm slowing, the feast's extravagance fading into a gentle murmur. The cooks finish cleaning, voices low and tired, and the last cups are emptied. The villa settles, ready for the quiet hours, and you feel yourself drifting along with it. Your breath slows, the richness of Roman life folding around you like a warm cloak. Soon, only the soft echo of stories remains, lulling you deeper into restful sleep. You drift lightly on the edge of dreams as Lucius's voice softens further, inviting you into the quieter corners of Roman dining culture, those whispered traditions and little-known customs that made these feasts so uniquely Roman. One such custom was the practice of symposia, inspired by Greek traditions but transformed under Roman taste. After the main courses, guests reclined on plush couches in the triclinium, sipping wine infused with honey or herbs. These moments were less about eating and more about conversation, storytelling, and music. You picture the flickering lamps casting long shadows on frescoed walls, while a harp's gentle twang threads through the air like a lullaby. The evening would often conclude with poetry readings or philosophical debates, subtle displays of wit that pleased the host and amused the guests. Interestingly, some Romans believed that eating heavier fare, like the infamous ostrich brain, before this part of the evening helped slow digestion and extend the pleasure of the gathering, kind of like a culinary slow dance. Historians still debate how widespread this practice truly was. Was it an elite indulgence or common across social strata? You chuckle softly imagining a rather tipsy senator, brain slightly fogged, attempting to recite verses from Virgil, somewhat less gracefully than in sober moments. And then there were the unique after-dinner entertainments. Some hosts employed exotic pets, like small monkeys or tame peacocks, to roam the room, their presence adding whimsy and conversation starters. Ostriches themselves were sometimes kept in large gardens, a living reminder of Rome's reach and the empire's far-flung wonders. You imagine a feathered bird strutting about, a quiet spectacle as guests relax, tired now but content. The gentle hum of conversation fades to murmurs and yawns. You feel the weight of the day's stories settling in a comfortable way, as if the night itself is inviting you to rest. The villa grows quiet, shadows lengthen, and Lucius's voice becomes a distant echo, soft and reassuring. Soon, only the tender warmth of memory and the whisper of feathers remain, carrying you gently towards sleep. The soft glow of dawn is still hours away, but inside the villa, a deep calm has settled. Your breath is steady now, heart slowed to the rhythm of an ancient world quietly folding into rest. Lucius's voice lingers like a gentle breeze, carrying the final stories as the night draws to a close. He shares the last secret, how these grand feasts, with their extravagant dishes like ostrich brains, were also acts of memory, commemorations of past glories and aspirations for the future. Each ingredient was a link in a chain of meaning, each course a subtle nod to Rome's vastness and diversity. You imagine a family, generations deep, gathering around a table heavy with delicacies, sharing laughter and tales as the world outside hums with the steady pulse of empire. The feast was a momentary sanctuary, a place where power and pleasure intertwined softly. One curious detail emerges. Some Roman hosts preserved the feathers and bones of ostriches after the feast, turning them into keepsakes or talismans believed to bring good fortune and protection. The idea that something as odd as an ostrich brain could connect you to luck is oddly comforting. Historians still debate whether such beliefs were widespread superstition or the clever marketing of the elite, but it adds a tender layer to the story of food and ritual. You feel the night's stories melting into a quiet peace, the vivid images gently blurring like a watercolor fading with the dawn. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and your mind softens, the world slows to a whisper. The scent of myrtle, the echo of laughter, the faint rustle of feathers, all fade into the hush of sleep. You're carried gently on the wings of ancient nights, where history and imagination mingle in the twilight between waking and dreaming. Let yourself drift. The pacing slows, the light dims, and your breathing settles into a softer rhythm. The lavishness of Roman feasts, the strange allure of ostrich brains, and the whispers of empire fade gently into the background. Imagine the warm glow of a flickering oil lamp, the faint scent of herbs lingering in the cool night air, and the quiet rustling of fine silk garments as guests retreat to restful slumber. You are wrapped in the calm embrace of history's gentle unfolding, where time seems to slow and every detail softly blurs into peaceful dreams. The distant murmur of a lute's strings, the subtle clink of glass, and the faint patter of footsteps on stone floors dissolve into a serene stillness. Remember the stories of distant lands, exotic birds, and the subtle dance of social rituals, all now resting quietly beneath the stars. Let the warmth of these moments soothe you as the world outside hushes and the night deepens. Sleep is a kind companion, ready to carry you gently across the threshold of the day's end. So, close your eyes, breathe in the calm, and drift softly into the restful night ahead. Sweet dreams, my friend.